Hey folks, welcome back for week 5, activity 1. This is not so much an activity for you to write something or research something, but rather I decided that our final project for the semester, the Campus Landscape Reconstruction Project, was important enough to go over the guidelines and make that a weekly activity. Now, if you remember last week, if you had a chance last week to take a look at the video for week 4, activity 2, the video titled Big News and Campus Building Timelines. You know that the big news was that our landscape reconstruction project is an individual project now. So this week, week 5, we are going to have 2 activities. The first activity is simply pay attention to this screencast and ask questions you may have via the Campus Landscape Reconstruction Project question forum. I'll show that to you. And the second activity for the week will be working with the ASU Historical Photos database on the Library Special Collections website. For this screencast, we're going to go through the Landscape Reconstruction Project guidelines and then take a look at the Special Collections website and relevant sources for this project. And then I want to show you our As You Learn site with a few new things I've added, the rationale. In the before time, the Campus Landscape Reconstruction Project was what we worked up to for the last half of our semester. All of those classes, in this case, all of those weekly activities around archival sources, were all geared towards providing you with different experiences with certain skill sets, navigating archival material and making inferences from archival material to understand the development of landscape over time. In the before time, we would have spent the last 3 or 4 classes of the semester in special collections or out and about on campus in teams reconstructing what the campus landscape looked like in a given year. And then at the end of the semester, during final exams, your team would have created a presentation and a map of campus. You brought your presentations to exam day. I brought pizza to exam day. But that's all from the before time. For this project, the product is going to be a brief presentation. Google Slides, PowerPoint, Keynote, entirely your choice. Focused on the history of one building on the ASU campus and its immediate surrounding landscape. Where was that building on campus? And where were the nearby structures to that building, and what were those structures? I have a list of buildings that I recommend that are findable buildings on the ASU campus. Please pick one of these buildings as your research building. You'll use material from the Special Collections Library that's all available online, as well as from the University Archives, to try to answer some questions about the building in a presentation via Google Slides, PowerPoint, or Keynote. The buildings are all listed in the guidelines right here. First Administration Building, we've had a little bit of experience with this so far this semester. Lovell Hall, not to be confused with Lovell Home. Lovell Hall was the larger dormitory built to replace Lovell Home. For a time, Lovell Hall stood with Lovell Home as Lovell Annex. And that's a trend that you may want to pay attention to as you do your research. At Appalachian State University, when a building was replaced by another building with the same name, if the first building was not torn down when the second building was built with that name, that first building became the annex. There is only one situation in campus history where a building was added onto, and the addition was called the annex. And in that case, it was the First Justice Hall. First Justice Hall had an addition built because we were brimming with students and needed more space. Another option is Second Science Hall, which stands today as Smith Wright Hall. However, be aware, Smith Wright Hall, when it was Second Science Hall, was the second of 3 science buildings built on campus. The First Science Hall did not stand where Smith Wright Hall stands today. The First Science Hall burned down in the 1940s, and the First Science Hall was not even near where Smith Wright Hall stands today. Chapel Wilson Hall, the College Bookstore. So the College Bookstore is findable, but of all the buildings on this list, it is the most difficult to find. It's findable, it's doable, you can find photos of it, you can find mention of it, but where exactly it was is a little harder than all the other buildings on the list. And so therefore it has a 5-point bonus available if you pick it. D.D. Doherty Library, second administration building. Be aware we are currently on our third administration building. Wellborn Hall, Dolph Bland Hall, and Founders Hall. These are the options. And the secret to why these are the options is that all of these buildings appeared on the 1947 Sanborn Insurance Map panel showing campus. We'll talk more about that map in just a moment. Moving on, step 2. Once you've picked a building, consult the University Archives historical timelines. We did this for week 4, activity 2. Go back into those timelines if you didn't already and figure out from those timelines when your building was built and any information the timeline provides about your building, such as maybe when it was torn down or burned down. If your building was built in, say, 1925, 1926, and you get the information, oh, here's what it was built, here's what it was named, great. However, keep looking through the timeline just in case there is a mention in later decades of your building having one of the following issues. The name changed. The building was demolished. The building burned down. The building's use changed. Sometimes, but not always, those kinds of references occur in later decades in the building timelines on the University Archives website. The ASU Historical Photographs Collection. This will be critical for you. You need to find as many photos of the building that you are researching as possible. There are also resources in the Rhododendron, the student yearbook, available through the University Archives website. We'll take a look at that. And then also through the Appalachian, the student newspaper. Both of these should be consulted, but consulting either the Rhododendron or especially the Appalachian will be a time-consuming effort on your part. I mean, this is a 40-point project. Can you do this project without consulting the Appalachian? I think you might be able to. Can you do this project without consulting the Rhododendron, the student yearbook? I think you could, but I think the Rhododendron would be a very useful resource for you for building photos and a little bit of information about what the building was used for. Normally, I wouldn't emphasize the Rhododendron or the Appalachian as much as I am right now, because during the before time, we could have gone to special collections, registered to use the closed stacks, and used a treasure trove of material about historic buildings that's sitting locked away in Belk Library in the closed stacks. So we got to make do. When using the University Archives historical timelines, the ASU Historical Photographs Collection, the Rhododendron, and the Appalachian, if you choose to use the Appalachian, there are questions that you should be trying to answer. When was your target building built, your RB building built? Where on campus was it located? What was it used for? Classrooms, men's or women's dorm rooms? What became of it? Burned down, demolished, currently standing? Did the name of the building change over the years? Did the use of it change over the years? And finally, what were the buildings around your building during your selected landscape year, which for everyone is 1950, because we have the 1947 Sanborn map. Makes figuring out 1950 just a little bit easier. Step 3, photos. As I said before, try to find as many photos of your selected building via the ASU Historical Photographs Collection as possible. If you remember our activity with historical photos, one of the key dictates of trying to find a building's location based on photos is that however good it is to find photos of the building's facade so you know what it looked like, it's better to find photos of the building with other buildings around it, larger landscape photos. That will help you start to figure out, okay, I need to know what my building looked like, but I also need to know what the buildings around it looked like so I can recognize them and figure out their names. Now, the landscape year map. This is the multi-step process for this. When you go through the digital collections, you can use the University Archives buildings timelines to figure out when your building was built, what it was used for, and maybe some information about the changes to its use life from the timeline. From the historical photos collection, you can find some more information about where your building was located and what it was used for, and you can find hopefully plenty of photos of your selected building and the buildings around it. The landscape year map that you'll have to draw, and I'm not taking off points for artistry or cartographic skills or the lack thereof, it's fine. That's, however, the most challenging part. So what do? How do you figure this out? Well, first, your landscape year will be for 1950, because that is the closest decennial year to the 1940 Sanborn Insurance Map. When you start tackling creating your map, I recommend doing so in 3 steps. For the first step in creating your landscape year map, I strongly recommend you take a good long look at the 1947 Sanborn Insurance Map posted to As You Learn. Now, there's a few things about that map, so let's take a look at it. And scroll down to the Landscape Reconstruction Project section. There are 2 copies of this map on As You Learn. There's a smaller file size JPEG and a larger, higher resolution TIFF image. I recommend working with the TIFF image. However, for this presentation, we're going to take the faster route and take a look at the JPEG. All right, once the JPEG loads, we can see that this is the 3rd page of the Sanborn Insurance Map for Boone, North Carolina in 1947. This area basically covers the northwest around Trivet and Newland Halls. Newland Halls right here. The College of Business, the Peacock Building, is roughly right here. And then here's over to King Street. Here's down King Street. The Turchin Center is right here. Here is First Baptist. And then down at the bottom here, the area that's off the map is Blowing Rock Road. And also off the map on this side would be River Street. Before we take a look at the buildings, one thing that's important to notice on the map is here. This scale shows us what distances on the map equal on the ground. The scale is 100 feet to 1 inch. We have some building functioning in 1947 as the Watauga County Hospital. We have a building just to the kind of northwest of that structure that's identified as classrooms on this map. Notice the name of the building is not listed. It just says classrooms. We go further north, we have some houses. Houses are identified with the letter D for domicile or domestic structure. We go further north, we have a girls' dormitory. Also, here is the New River Power and Light Company. This is the steam plant. We look over here, we see a building marked cafeteria, another girls' dormitory. We have a gymnasium, an administration building, a library, boys' gymnasium, way over here, boys' dormitory, and again, I told you already that this was Newland Hall. Kind of look over here, we have a science building, Boone Grade School, College Avenue that takes us to King Street, and the Boone Baptist Church, which is the same as today, the Boone Baptist Church. Remaining on campus, we have Appalachian High School. One more landmark to reference, Boone Grade School, currently Belk Library. All right. A few other things, you could see some of these buildings are identified by name, but not all. Here's St. Luke's Episcopal Church. If you're wondering, the library bus circle is right about here. Student Services Building, right here. Student Union, right here. Another house. And if you're wondering about the S's, that means that this corner structure was a store. Second, for your map itself, as I said before, you can draw this by hand. You can draw it on your computer. Your map year is 1950, and there's some things to include on your map. You need to include an arrow indicating magnetic north. You can determine this by either opening Google Earth, zooming into the area of campus where you think your building was located, and seeing what direction the compass points. Alternatively, you can just use the mnemonic, the old rule of thumb, that if you were standing on Sanford Mall and looking at the cupola of Belk Library, that is roughly magnetic north. Also, all buildings on your map should be drawn with line styles that indicates the difference in the buildings based on which building is your research building, your primary focused building, and which buildings are the neighboring buildings. Also, you need to draw the neighboring buildings in a way that indicates whether a building is still standing or not. You could, for instance, draw your research building that you're focused on for your research report with a thick bold line. You could then draw neighboring buildings that are still standing on the contemporary campus with a solid line, perhaps not as bold as your research building, and buildings that are no longer standing on campus that are neighboring buildings in 1950 to your research building, perhaps using a dashed or dotted line. You will need to provide the names for all of the structures on your map. Providing the name of your research building, but figuring out the names of the nearby buildings, the neighboring buildings, might be a little bit tricky. That's where step 3 comes in. This is my recommended procedure for you to figure out what those buildings were named. First, look at that 1947 Sanborn and identify the campus buildings nearest to your building. Now, if it doesn't seem like your building had a campus building that was closer than 100 feet, then pick the nearest building that's 200 feet away. We want to have at least 2 or 3 other buildings on your map with your research building. If you want to simply draw a hand-drawn copy of the Sanborn map that shows your building and 2 or 3 nearest buildings, that's fine. That's what the Sanborn map is there for. But make sure you note what those buildings are per that Sanborn map. And again, remembering most buildings on the Sanborn map were simply labeled with their function if they were on campus. Hospital, boys' gymnasium, girls' dormitory, library. So here is where we got to figure out what could those other buildings have been. We have to rely on the 2 pieces of information the Sanborn map gives us about those other buildings. First, the Sanborn map gives us a function of those buildings in 1947. Girls' dormitory, gymnasium, library, science building, etc. Second, the Sanborn map in 1947 gives us a building profile or an outline of how the building looked. Both of those will be critical in the next 2 steps. So, the next recommended step here is to make a list of what buildings were on campus in 1950 based on the University Archives building timeline. If you did Week 4 Activity 2, at the end of Week 4 Activity 2's work with the University Archives historical building timelines, you have a comprehensive list of all of the buildings that stood on campus in 1930. Now, you could simply expand that list, that same process of going through the 1930s and looking at any buildings that were added to campus in the 30s, and then looking again in the 1940s. Because we're only going to 1947, 1950, right? Do you need to worry about every building built on campus through the year 1947, 1950? No, you don't. Look at your primary research building. If the 2 nearest buildings to your research building were, say, a gymnasium and a girls' dormitory, all you have to do is go through your list of buildings that perhaps you created for Week 4 Activity 2, that comprehensive list of buildings on campus in 1930. Look at that list, highlight only dormitories and gymnasium buildings. You're whittling the list down to likely candidates for those buildings surrounding your research building as identified only by their function on the Sanborn insurance map. Then look at the 1930s and 1940s building timelines and write down only buildings identified as dormitories or gymnasiums. That will give you a relatively short list that you'll need for the next step in this process. Here's where you turn to the next recommended step, the ASU Historic Photos collection. When you turn to that collection, reflect back on your work on week 5, activity 2. That is the work with the historical photos collection. In that process, you should, hopefully, have learned how to search, navigate, and pull information from the historical photos collection. What you'll want to do in the historical photos database is to take your list of potential candidate buildings that could have been those neighboring buildings and search for them. And look at your search results. When a building comes up and the building is, say, a girls' dormitory, look at the photos of it. Look at those photos and look back at the plan view, the top-down view of your neighboring structures. Again, in this example, is a girls' dormitory. Do those photos match the profile, or do they not? Was your neighboring structure a girls' dormitory in the shape of an E? Well, do the photos you see of a particular dormitory match that design? If they don't, scratch that dormitory off your list and start searching for photos of the next dormitory on your list. Eventually, you'll end up in 3 possible scenarios based on that search. One scenario is the most favorable scenario, and that is you found buildings that you're pretty confident that's that neighboring dormitory, and this is that neighboring gymnasium, or this is that neighboring cafeteria. That is your ideal scenario. At that point, you simply label the buildings on your map and work on finishing up your presentation. Save it, upload it to As You Learn. You're good, you're done. Good for you. Another possible scenario is that you find that there's only 1 or 2 photos of a dormitory that maybe could be that dormitory you're interested in, but they don't show enough of the building, or they don't show enough of that gymnasium to say this really is that dormitory. In that case, before you say, maybe it's this Smith Hall, maybe it's this White Hall, maybe it's this Jones Hall, recommendation is to go to the ASU University Archives and navigate through the rhododendron for the 1940s into the 1950s, looking for photos labeled with that questionable dorm that you think maybe it could be this Jones Hall, maybe it could be this Smith Hall, but I don't have enough photos of it from the historical photos database. Well, the Rhododendron Student Yearbook is your backup source for photos of campus buildings. The final step in the process. You've done your research. You've been able to answer questions about your primary or RB building, was built, what it was used for, any changes in its name, any changes in its use, and its status at the end of the day. Was it demolished? Was it torn down, burned down, still standing on campus? You know where it was. You know what its neighboring buildings were in 1950, and you have a reasonable idea of what the names of those neighboring buildings were in 1950. What do you do next? You create a presentation. Google Slides, Keynote, or PowerPoint that basically walks me, your audience, through the history of your building. You can see what to worry about here in the guidelines. Your map should be in your presentation as well. Take a photo of it, save it, send it to yourself, add it to your presentation. In general, you shouldn't need to cite sources unless for some reason you found an image of your structure on a Google search. But for the most part, if all of your source material came out of the university archives, whether the building timelines, the rhododendron, or the student newspaper, and out of special collections from the ASU Historical Photos database. If you want me to take a look at what you've done, please feel free. I got nothing but time and quarantine to worry about. Whatever you end up doing, wrap it up by May 7th so I can get your grades in. Now, a couple things more. First, let's go to As You Learn. On As You Learn, there are a number of resources I've provided for you on this project. First is a copy of these guidelines. We'll get back to this one in just a moment. Copies of the 1947 Sanborn, as I said before, as a JPEG or as a TIFF. I've also included direct links to the resources in the University Archives and Special Collections, including the University Archives Timelines page, the ASU Historical Photos Collection, the Rhododendron, the Appalachian, and then finally down here, the Dropbox. Never mind this stuff. As you see, this is hidden from students. These are just older items that I kept around. But here's the Dropbox to upload your project, if you save it as a PowerPoint or a Keynote. If you do your project in Google Slides, just make sure that come May 7th, you've shared with me from Google Slides access to your presentation, to my averyquins@appstate.edu email address. Otherwise, I can't see your presentation. Before we leave here and take a look at some of these resources, or want to point out finally at the end some of these resources, I also added a landscape reconstruction project questions forum. I want to try to use any questions you may have to help your fellow students. So if you have a question you're thinking, oh, I'm going to email Dr. Avery Quinn about that, well, you can. I'm not going to ignore your email. However, it would be much nicer if you posted your question to the forum. I will receive notifications when questions are posted to the forum, and I will do my best to answer those questions as soon as possible. That way, if anyone has a question about the project, I recommend checking out this forum because there may be questions similar to your question and answers from me that will answer your question before you have to worry about asking it. So I broke up the forum by topics. The map, if you have questions pertaining to the map, drawing the map, creating the map, any of the issues around the map design, layout, feel free to ask those here. Any questions about building locations? I think my building was on this side of campus. I think it was this building on the 1947 Sanborn map. I can try to answer those questions there. If you have questions about using the historical photos collection, if you have questions about, is this building really my building, or is this building in the photo that looks like it's to the right of my building? Is that really to the right? Is that to the north? Is that to the south? If you have photo questions, post them here. If you have questions about the building timelines, here. And any other questions you may have, if they don't fit one of these 4 categories, feel free to post them in general questions. A reminder, and a little bit more of an in-depth look, we go to the Belk Library Information Commons website, library.appstate.edu. We then navigate to Special Collections. From the Special Collections site, remember we can get to the ASU Historical Photos database by clicking Digital Collections and then Collections. We go down the list and click Next Page, and there's the ASU Historical Photos. You can then browse the collection, and then we can search the collection here for our building names and look for photos of our particular building. And a reminder, if you click the photo thumbnail, you'll get the photo. However, if you click the text caption, you'll get some basic information. So that's the photos collection. To get to our other materials, we need to go to the University Archives and Records link. Click that link, and that brings us here. We've used already the historical facts about ASU link, the historical timelines, and the campus buildings. All right. However, what I want to show you to wrap up this screencast are the other 2 items that you may want to consult. If we're looking for copies of the rhododendron and copies of the Appalachian Student Newspaper, they are both in the section ASU Publications and Resources. Digital copies of the student newspaper, the Appalachian, digital versions from 1934 to 1975 are available here at the ASU Digital Collections site. And the other item we're interested in is up here, the annual yearbooks, the rhododendron. Let's go to the Appalachian first and then go back to look at the rhododendron. Click this link, the App State University Digital Collections page. We can then browse by decade, and I'm going to go to the 1940s. And then let's go straight to 47 for this example. And here's basically what we have. We have a weekly newspaper. You can click, say, January 24th, 1947, and what comes up is a window that's going to load what I think is probably like a JavaScript with a PDF view of the Appalachian. And we can simply scroll through it and see if, in this case, are there any photos of any campus buildings. Nope, there's not in that year. So we can close that tab and go to another issue, March 14th. The college was represented at Forensic Meet in Hickory. Mrs. Wilson talks to ACE on recent education tour. The musings of a mountaineer. Howdy! You know it's amazing how times do change things. Certified tops, Chesterfield's triple smoking pleasure. That is the Appalachian and how to navigate it. So if we go back to the ASU Publications and Resources page and go to the rhododendron, you'll find, I think, that the rhododendron is a little easier to navigate because, well, first, there's fewer issues of it. It's an annual publication. And two, I think the digital layout is a little easier to see. And so the rhododendron has 74 records found. And here are the rhododendron links. And if you'll notice, they are arranged by year, oldest copy to most recent copy. So let's just go to the 1922 copy of the rhododendron. Now this provides us with a thumbnail. So you can go through the thumbnail view, and if you see something of interest, you can simply click the thumbnail to see it here on this window. And of course, there's also a zoom function that works, I think, a little better than on the Appalachian. And look, our founders, B.B. Doherty and D.D. Doherty. Whoa, look at B.B.'s eyes in that photo. Blow that up and put that up on your wall. Kind of scare you into keeping up with your coursework. But, oh, look, landscape photo. Looks like the bottomlands along, it says the titled campus. Looks like the bottomlands along Boone Creek. The hill going up to, oh, look, there's a steeple. That's the Watauga Academy. But that's not the first administration building next to it. Gotta wonder what that is. Oh, look. There's another building. We zoom in. Science building. That's the building we saw next to the Watauga Academy. That's not Smith Wright Hall, please note. So all that's here. And so you can hopefully see why I recommend the rhododendron as your go-to backup to the ASU Historical Photos collection, just in case you're having trouble finding photos of buildings through the collection. So that's the rundown on the landscape reconstruction project. Feel free to ask me any questions, and if you want to ask questions most effectively in a way that helps your classmates, ask those questions on the Landscape Reconstruction Project forum, right on our As You Learn site. All right, take care.